Oh, with the Wisconsin race behind them, the frontrunners Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton turning their focus back east, where they seem to have an edge and await a big bag of delegates. A new Monmouth University poll out today shows 52% of Republican voters favor Donald Trump in the upcoming New York primary on April 19th. That poll has Governor John Kasich second at 25%, and Ted Cruz, well, he's at 17%. Mr. Trump has more than half the vote in New York City, where he was born, also in Long Island and upstate New York. Meanwhile, the Quinnipiac University poll also has Mr. Trump leading in New York with 56%, Cruz and Kasich at 20% and 19%. Let's take a look over at Pennsylvania, where it's a little closer. Trump leading with 39%, Cruz and Kasich both at 30 and 24, as you can see. As for the Democrats, well, in New York, where Bernie Sanders was born and Hillary Clinton now calls home and where she served, Mrs. Clinton leading in the polls by 54 to 42%. There are also similar numbers in Pennsylvania there. Clinton at 50, Sanders at 44. And there's some surprising numbers for November, too. Emily Tish Sussman is a Democratic strategist. Kevin Paul Scott, a Republican strategist, who worked in the 2008 Huckabee campaign. Welcome to you both. Kevin, let me start with you. You know, in New York, they say New York, you can make it anywhere if you can make it here. But it seems that Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders can't. Do you expect this will hold out on April 19th?
Well, absolutely. This is Donald Trump's home turf. He's going to do very well in New York. And Hillary, this is one of her, I think, 3 adopted states she has, so I expect her to do well there as well. But that doesn't really help them with the bigger problem. Trump is having a challenge right now of, if he's not going to get to 1237, he's got to at least appear that he has the momentum going into the convention to be able to say he has a mandate to have the nomination. Hillary also is struggling. She can't put Bernie Sanders away, and those two things combined doesn't mean the frontrunners aren't going to win, but it shows a deep-seated problem with the bases of both parties right now.
You know, Emily, as he points out, the senator, rolling. I mean, he keeps on going, and he's from Brooklyn. It could possibly get much closer here.
It could. It seems unlikely, certainly given the demographics of every state that has voted so far. Sanders has done well in states that are primarily white, primarily rural, caucus states, and New York is none of those things. It is interesting what an outsized role New York is playing in this election so far. It's really, we don't really say most national elections will come down to New York. You know, we don't hear that often. It came up earlier during the Republican debates when Cruz had accused Trump of having New York values. Now we have a businessman from New York and Trump. Sanders was born in New York, although hasn't lived there in many, many years. And Clinton actually served as senator. You know, you can say she called a couple of states home, but she actually served and was elected twice as senator for New York. So in a race like this, you'd look to see, one of the predictors would be if they have voted for this person before, and they have voted for her overwhelmingly twice.
Well, don't you think
it's a pretty good indicator.
And don't you think her operation, they would have the names and they have the supporters, and she served for 2 terms of the Senate, and that's part of your database.
It is part of the database, but I mean, I think it's a little bit of a different database. I mean, we're certainly talking about a couple of years later. I don't know that that is so much the advantage, so much as that she actually appeals to the voters and knows what the issues are there. One of the issues she's been talking about very strongly over the last couple of days in the state is gun violence prevention. It's a place that Sanders just really continues to struggle with, particularly with the Democratic base.
The front page of the Daily News today. I mean, they just slam him over his view on gun control. And Kevin, I mean, that could hurt him, especially in New York City.
Yeah, and what we've got to look is the more heavily minority area. So Clinton is doing very well. She's spending most of her time campaigning in heavily African-American and Latino areas. It's going to be interesting to see by what margins does she win those groups by, because that's going to be the narrative going forward is, yeah, there's no doubt that Bernie Sanders has done better in predominantly white areas, but Clinton has still failed to coalesce the party completely around her, and this is going to be a big bellwether. It's not if she wins, it's by how much she wins and in what areas she's able to carry the state. Yeah. If Sanders wins heavily in upstate New York, I think that should still be concerning for the Clinton campaign.
You know, there's something else that could be concerning for the Clinton campaign. Emily, have you seen the numbers in Pennsylvania from the latest poll? Let's put it up for a second. It shows, yes, Mrs. Clinton in a general election would beat Donald Trump, but she would just tie Ted Cruz. What is up with that?
Would be interesting. Look, I think part of what Kevin's talking about is the game of expectations, and that's actually been the biggest thing in Sanders' favor, actually also in Trump's favor in this election cycle, that the expectations were low. So anything they can come back with is beating those expectations. Look, if Sanders and Clinton actually break even for the rest of the states, she still wins. He has to actually gain 58% of the remaining delegates, which seems pretty unlikely given the way that he's been campaigning so far. So the expectation was always that he would do very poorly. So the fact that he's done well even moderately makes him look like a huge winner. And the same for Trump, actually.
Yeah, Kevin, on the other side of the coin, you got a socialist who Hillary Clinton questioned if he's even in the Democratic Party, beating both of your guys. Let's take a look at the general election with Senator Sanders. He would, in a matchup now, defeat both Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. What about that? This is Pennsylvania.
Which is precisely John Kasich's argument for staying in the race. He's trying to say, hey, GOP voters, you don't like me, but you've got to like me more because I have a shot at beating both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders.
Is that going to work?
That's why this open committee. Well, I don't think it's going to work specifically for Kasich, but it could work for another alternative in the convention. You keep hearing this argument that if Trump doesn't win on the first ballot, he probably doesn't win. You're hearing people talk about Cruz. I think there's an increasingly likely opportunity that if Trump doesn't get 1237, that it's not Trump, it's not Cruz, and it's not Kasich. I don't care what Reince Priebus says. I think there's a high likelihood that somebody else comes in here that they think they like enough and that can beat Hillary and Bernie.
You know, that is going to cause an uproar in the ranks, you know, if someone comes in and especially if they can't coalesce against them. Finally, you talk about John Kasich. Emily, let me show you this. He beats both Democrats in November. I mean, and he just got one state. So what do you do about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, Rubio has more delegates than Kasich, and he's out of the race, and people are talking about him coming back into the race because they think the convention is going to be such a mess. If we learned anything from the Wisconsin primary last night, it's that Trump is not going to lock up the delegates he needs to win automatically to going into the Republican convention. And the Cruz voters overwhelmingly don't necessarily love Cruz, but they really don't like Trump. So, I mean, I think Kasich actually has every reason to stay in. There's certainly a chance. Maybe Rubio comes back. That's a possibility now. I think the only thing that we can guarantee is that it's going to be a mess.
Oh, man. Well, I'm confused. I'm totally confused now. All right, well, we'll try to sort it out over the next few months. Kevin and Emily, thank you. Heather?
We'll explain at the break, Eric.